people here.
Hadassah.
Sweetie, what year were Joe and I at the embassy?
2014, I believe.
Wow. Okay. You know,
Hi,
time.
everyone, as you're zooming in, you're joining our small talk,
Hello.
the pre-party with me and Hadassah and Beth. Get your books ready.
Oh, you're so sweet.
All right, so I think we have tapered off and we'll begin. Welcome everybody to P&P Live. My name is Beth Wong. I'm an event manager at Politics and Prose. And we thank you so much for joining us here to celebrate the release of Hadassah, an American Story. At any time during the event tonight, you can click on the link that I'm going to put in the chat to purchase copies of tonight's book on P&P's website. Your purchases come to the store at a difficult time for small businesses across the country, of course. And in addition to growing your own library, a book sale from Politics and Prose means that we at the store are able to keep bringing you content like this, content that we're so proud of, and that we have a tradition of bringing to the DC and P&P community. You can ask our author a question tonight by submitting it to the Q&A box, the button for which is found at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to submit those questions in the Q&A and not into the chat to make sure our author sees it. I will waste no more time in getting to the main event. Born in Prague to Holocaust survivors, Hadassah Lieberman and her family immigrated in 1949 to the United States. In Hadassah, an American Story, Lieberman pens the compelling story of her life, from her family's experience in Eastern Europe to their move to Gardner, Massachusetts, and her life on the national political stage. Tonight, Lieberman is in conversation with Ambassador Norman Eisen, a senior fellow in governance studies at Brookings and an expert on law, ethics, and anti-corruption. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So
Thank
happy.
you, Beth. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this wonderful Politics and Prose event with my friend, Hadassah Lieberman, the author of the wonderful Hadassah. I promise you, if you haven't purchased it already, if you click that link, you will not be disappointed. It's a beautiful book. It's a history not only of Hadassah, her life, her parents, and her family's life. It's a microcosm of some of the greatest and most terrible moments of the past century, which has featured some of the highs and lows of the history of human civilization. We're going to talk about that. It's a unique book because it actually is not just by Hadassah. One of the things she's done that I love is ask others for in her family, for their reflections on particular moments to offer another lens. So it's really a prismatic view of Hadassah's journey and of these incredible moments in the history of the United States and Europe and the way those two continents are connected. I lived part of this, of course, as you've already heard. Prague has a very special place in both Hadassah and my life. Hadassah and her husband Joe, old friends, visited me when I was ambassador in Prague, in the ambassador's residence in Prague, which is notable because it was the headquarters of the occupying Germans, of the German Wehrmacht in World War II. I'm also from a Czech family, and those were the same occupiers who deported my family to Auschwitz, where many of them perished. Hadassah's story is a story of the not uncomplicated survival of her mother and her father. She talks about them both. Wonderful excerpts from her mother's diary that you'll read as another prism on the events, the incredible events. And when you read that diary, as I did, you'll get absolute chills thinking that this was the mother of an American who would later go on the campaign trail as the wife of the first Jewish candidate for vice president of the United States. The incredible contrast between the two. And finally, I should say a word about how pleased, I was extra pleased. I would have done this for any bookstore with Hadassah, but I was extra pleased to do it at Politics and Prose because I'm a Politics and Prose author and have done one of these book talks back in the day when you could do them live. And I'm a Politics and Prose customer. I took my wife shopping there for Mother's Day. That was part of our Mother's Day activity, and we bought a big armload of books. And I encourage everybody to do that. Start by clicking on the link. Let me just check and make sure it's in the chat. Yes, it is. You can start by clicking on the link to purchase your copy of Hadassah, An American Story there. So Hadassah, it's so wonderful to do this with you. Landswoman, that's what we say when you're in Yiddish, when you're from the same geography. Well, she's my landswoman. Hadassah, what wisdom do you have for us to start?
Well, before I give any wisdom, I want to give you my feelings. I want to articulate what this means to me. For us who are survivors of this horrendous past, and I always say we came out of the darkness and we evolved through immigration, through history, through moments, we evolved in the light in ways that our parents saw and didn't see fully because they didn't make it to this day. And I am so appreciative of being able to do this with you because when you make reference to your ambassadorship and how you lived in this gorgeous house in Prague, the ambassador's home, and how when I went in that house with my husband and we were staying for Shabbat, Friday night and Saturday, I looked around and I thought, oh my goodness, it was originally a Jewish home, correct? That had been taken over by the Nazis. And you, Norm, took me to this table that stood against the wall as you go up the stairs. And you turned it upside down and showed me the insignia from the Nazis. I was so touched by that. And I felt such a camaraderie with you, because here we were, the kids of survivors. And here, every time when the campaign flourished and went into 2000 and all that stuff, and standing up on the stages and meeting people, I knew I represented someone different. I wasn't there for me. I was there because I was there for everybody. All the people who couldn't believe I was there, who hadn't seen someone like me and Joe up on that stage. And that's why when I was in your house, I had many tears. And I'm very thankful we're here today about to reminisce on poetry and prose on my book.
Well, and the book does contain poetry, it contains prose, and it contains politics. Yes. So we couldn't have a better place to do the event. Yeah. So yes. Hadassah, let me, as an author myself, it's like giving birth. Every time I write a book, I tell myself, "Oh, I'll never do it again," and then I forget. Tell us a little bit more about why you decided to. You've talked to so many people over the years. I've heard you speak so beautifully. Tell us more about why you decided that it was time to have a book telling your story, and why this moment?
Well, my mother gave me the story that she had gone through from Auschwitz. And I remember reading that paragraph that's in the book. I had never seen it until I was cleaning her books out after her death. And then when I looked at it and she said, I've done the best I can do to write this. And now I look to you children to complete it. Well, I had to write this also to come out of that darkness and to go in this constant light. Wait.
Beth, we've temporarily lost Hadassah.
Yes, I think she was on an iPad and I think she got a call, but I'm going
and that kicked her off. All right, I'm
Yeah.
going to comment on her answer.
Please.
Because I had a comment that I wanted. Hadassah's answer to my question was that she inherited a legacy, but it was a complicated legacy. And you'll read about that painful legacy in the book. And in fact, her mother could not bring herself to speak about it. And that the time had come to tell this story publicly as part of Hadassah herself coming to grips with the legacy. And I know myself as the child of a Holocaust survivor, and that I had the identical experience, and that writing my book about those days, telling my mother's story and wrapping it in the stories, all the stories of that residence that I lived in that started out as a Jewish one and then occupied by the German Wehrmacht, the Nazi regime during World War II. And then successively occupied by a series of American ambassadors thereafter. The telling that story had a marvelous cathartic effect for me, in addition to whatever purposes it may have served. So that's part of the reason that politics and prose is such a treasure, why we're so keen to patronize the bookstores, because they tell the story. So many of those stories, each one of them is shedding light, relieving a burden, guiding people on the way forward. So, and Hadassah certainly is a noble addition to that. Oh, good. Oh, I see we have a Zoom bomber, Hadassah.
Oh my God!
I would recognize your technical assistant anywhere. Hi, Joe.
Say hi to
I'm very highly paid.
He's on a Zoom himself. But sweetie, sorry. Anyway,
while you were gone, I explained what you meant by the shedding the light and relieving the burden and showing the way to others, because I had the same experience you were talking about. And
yes.
so you did not miss anything. I gave the commentary that I was gonna do. And the last thing I'll say about that is the shadow of the Holocaust that Hadassah talks about in the book. So Hadassah, another thing you talk about a lot in this book, and again, very meaningful for me, and it's very much of the moment now. You immigrated to the US with your parents in 1949 at about 9 months of age. I won't ask you about your memories of what it was like at 9 months of age, but I will ask you about the meaning for you of being an immigrant. What does being an immigrant mean to you?
It means a lot in some of the sentences, the paragraphs my parents talked about with me. Oh, when you were a baby and we came over on the big ship to the United States, everyone was sick. And Hadassah, my mother used to say, was dancing with the captain. She wasn't sick. So I remember that. And then my mother said, and we came into the harbor and went past the Statue of Liberty. Emma Lazarus, give me, you're tired, you're poor, yearning to breathe free. And my mother couldn't get over that. This was the great, after all they'd gone through, they were dreaming of this direction to this country. So that, coupled with so many different instances when I came knowing only the language Yiddish, I knew nothing else, knew no English. And my parents sent me to kindergarten. My mother braided my hair. I had to wear a skirt because my mother said, no, not pants. I said, Mommy, all the girls wear pants. I said that in Yiddish. She said, no, no pants. So I'll never forget. I went to school and then I came back like all the little immigrants come home and they only speak the Yiddish language or whatever, Spanish, whatever it is. And there I was. And I told my mother, no more Yiddish when she asked me. I said, only English, only English. So that started, my parents had to seriously speak English. And those were, coming to America was a overwhelming experience. And that tales that I heard about that, even the tale of how I was named Hadassah. My dad had taken me to be registered in Prague. It must have been for the school, education, whatever it was. And my father sat there and he said, we are naming her Esther. And the official said, Esther's a German name. Don't name her. So my father said, well, I named her Hadassah because he wouldn't let me do Esther. So he named me Hadassah. We came to this country and we were being registered by the Catholic nuns of Gardner for schools, for registration. And my father said, okay, to sister, I want to change her name to what it was supposed to be after her grandmother, Esther. And the nun looked at my father, who had been ordained a rabbi, and said to my dad, you can't do that, Rabbi. You must name her Hadassah. Those were stories coming out of the background that we came out of. Were totally different. To learn a new language. And the final little story I want to share is going to kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher would hold this basket over her head. And if you were good for the day, you got to pick either candies or car toys or your little babies. And I was so shocked that this country let you pick things out of a basket to take home and keep. So I was excited.
Red and Blois English.
Yeah.
My parents were also Yiddish speakers, and we would always try. And I had I still have a little bit, Hadassah. You've done a better job than I have, particularly when I put down my guard. There's a little bit of that Yiddish lilt that comes in to my speech, and people often think, even though I'm from Los Angeles, they often say to me, "Are you from New York?" Because they hear that the Yiddish. I had a very severe Yiddish accent when I went to school as a child.
Funny. You know what? It's amazing because the similarities and with other immigrants, but the similarities we share in terms of language and adjustment and clothes and everything was different. And
talk about that because you had very interesting engagements on the campaign trail with immigrants. And of course, immigration is such a hot button issue today, such a critical issue. So talk about the relevance of your immigrant experience to other immigrants in this wonderful American, sometimes I call it a cholent pot. Cholent is our traditional Shabbat stew. Everything gets cooked together and you can hardly tell what anything is, but it's more like America is more like a tossed salad.
It's a tossed salad.
We have all the ingredients. So tell us the relevance to the other immigrants that you encounter, both on the campaign trail and today?
Well, a recent story that I recall all the time now is when my husband was going to his company in the city when we moved here following his retirement, and his driver was a Pakistani man. And Joe and I rode into New York that day. He was coming in, and his driver was listening apparently to what I was talking about, immigration and what I wanted to say. And the Pakistani driver turned around and said, "When is this book coming out? This is a chapter I want my children to read. You're talking about things that they will identify with, all of the changes they've gone through." Well, that and the times during the campaign, well, I'll never forget in 2000, going into airports and just walking around all the time with people who came up to me and said, "You're an immigrant. You understand me. You can speak for me." And I was so touched by that. It happened wherever I went. And then when the Democratic Party in Tennessee, when we announced ourselves to everyone, my husband and Vice President Gore at that point in time, we were standing up there with Hillary, talking to the people, and all these men in their military uniforms who had been there in the camps during the liberation, Germany. And when I met them, they held my hand so tight with that memory. So I kept having these feelings and these sights and said to myself, we particularly who have emigrated to this country have to always be sensitive to the immigrant, have to understand we were the ones who made the phone calls to the doctors, to the teachers, to people we called for our parents because their English wasn't that recognizable. I was always on the phone. Oh, Hadassah, can you write a letter? Can you write a thank you note? Can you do this? And I used to do it, no problem, all the time. But a lot of people who are not immigrants don't get that. They don't get it. We're a different breed when we're children of immigrants. Right, Norm?
It's so true. And this is a nation of immigrants. And you write so beautifully about the change between that spirit of welcome that you received in 2000 and some of the less benign attitudes that have crept into the discourse. In fact, I wanted to read from it in the book. You say you would be remiss if you did not acknowledge the role that the internet and social media and freedom of speech, which you revere, has played in allowing hate and misinformation to fester, including against immigrants. But then you write, and it is so characteristic of this book, I wanted to share it. I marked it in my copy. My hope is that we can counter this darkness with more light, more love, more transparency and honesty. And I think you do that by talking very honestly about the events of your own life, including some that are family events, health events, and others that are very challenging events. You're very candid about them, but you always explain, Hadassah, how you took those challenges and transcended them. So it is a wonderful read. Do not forget to click on the link to order. And I see that people, Lissa has done this. Bless you, Lissa. People are starting to put questions in the Q&A, which is a very good thing. So you should, and Lissa has a great question. So friends, start populating your questions into the Q&A. I'm going to dip into and out of those starting in a few minutes. So On the more personal note, less on a policy note, talk a little bit, because I loved hearing the voices of the kids and the family in this book, Hadassah. And it's obvious that you have a very successful blended family. And that is a significant experience for many, many Americans today. Can you talk a little bit about your son was 7. He's grown into a wonderful young man and a brilliant scholar. Joe's 2 kids were teenagers, and that was before you had a child of your own.
Yes.
Talk about how you managed to blend the families a little bit.
Yes. Well, first, I want to say that was one of the hardest tasks I undertook in my life, one of the hardest, because to blend a family, that really means you have to feel in your heart and you have to show in your body, in your face, that you love all equally. And I've often said that you fall in love with a person, and it is very critical to always fall in love with his or her children. Because this is for me, I don't talk for everyone, but how can someone love someone else and not love their children totally? Our children are like our shirt, our arms, our legs. They're part of our bodies. So one of the big challenges was working on that. It's so funny because we had a neighbor in New Haven, Connecticut, and her brother-in-law was a psychiatrist. And I remember he'd come over to visit them all the time. And I said to him, "Doctor, I have a question. How long does it take to bond a family like ours?" He said, "Oh, it's 5 years." I said, 5 years? I said, I don't wait 5 years for anything. Well, you know what? It was 5 years. And you have to learn to shut your mouth and show love and patience. And those are hard, but you know what? The best, and we never called children step. They were our children. And none of this stepmother, stepfather, none of that. As a matter of fact, Hani, our baby that we had together, said to us early on when she, assessed it, she said, my sister and brothers all go somewhere else for weekends sometimes. And I don't have someone to go to. So I was laughing. I said, Joey, we gave her a good view on divorce. And that's important. Never talk negatively about an ex-spouse, a step-parent of your children, because you can't do that. It's dirty. It's not good. So I worked hard, and we brought them together for everything, as much as they could go. And, we walked to school, and Matt and Becca went to high school close by in New Haven. And Hani, she was in Washington, D.C., because Joe had taken on the Senate at that point already. And so she had to just accustom herself to Washington. And then we go home to New Haven on some weekends. And other times I'd stay home in Washington with her. So all of those things are so critical to be mindful of, and particularly with your children, and not hurt them, because they get so hurt. I've been to weddings where you can see there's a sadness because the parent's marrying someone else, and there is a sadness in these children's faces. That's not fair. We always said to them, look, it's not their fault if they have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. I'll never forget Rebecca, our oldest daughter. I'm telling this again because said it not so long ago. And their mother, Betty, thanked me for saying we were standing under the canopy, the chuppah, and it was such a tight group. We were all together. And Betty was right there, and we were sort of leaning against each other to get together. And I thought, you know what? Thank God. And we have to show our love and kindness.
Beautiful. I have to say that over the years, Hadassah and Joe have been wonderful advisors to me and to Lindsay. And my next question is going to be about something that I learned from the two of you that was very influential and very powerful for me. And it also relates to Lissa's question. We went to synagogue with Hadassah and Joe for many, many years here at Kesher in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., another wonderful Washington institution like Politics and Prose,
Yes.
and one that has a large number of Politics and Prose customers. And some of our friends from the synagogue actually live not far from the bookstore. And when on Shabbat, Joe would always, if he had business on the Hill, he would come to synagogue. Often he would come to the special early service. We have a special 7:30 service for people like me who don't have the patience to sit through the long service. And then he would walk into the Senate, and he'd have a gentleman security accompany him because he's so recognizable. And I thought, and Hadassah would stay in the synagogue and come to the Kiddush and socialize and go to lunch and have her Shabbat life. And Joe would eventually make his way back from Congress on those Sabbaths when he had something to do. And that really, I admired it. And then years later, when I was working in government and I also had emergencies, I would emulate that. And it was a wonderful, and Lindsay would emulate you, Hadassah. And it was a wonderful example of how the two of you juggled that. And that brings me to my question from Alyssa. How did you and the senator manage to balance observing Shabbat and his government responsibilities, including the disruption that is caused on Shabbat that I just described? I'm sure it could be done, but I wonder if it was tricky. And I'm going to tell one more story after you answer. A wonderful story about this at Kesher.
Well, it was, we were Shomer Shabbat. We were observing Shabbat. There was never a question on that. And in 2000, this went on for weekends and for years when Joe was doing politics out of Connecticut too. And we always observed Shabbat, which means on a Friday night, and Friday afternoon, you cook your meal ahead of time, or you do it Thursday night. I always did that when I was working and stuff like that. And then you have a meal and you don't travel from Friday night to Saturday. And we did that. When Joe had his votes, was it disruptive? Well, you had to deal with, he might not be home that Shabbat till later. And there were times things are going on through Sunday. And there were times that we had Shabbat and we went to the hotel near the Senate because he was going to be in session. And I'll never forget, one Friday night, we covered his desk with a tablecloth and put our candlesticks on and our challah bread, and people came in. Other senators in between their votes were coming in. I didn't, what did we have? I brought food. It was nothing gargantuan. It was just so nice. And they came in. I'd never seen Joe's desk covered with a tablecloth, but we did that. And then in the campaign, it was really amazing because there were times that they had a Shabbat walking distance from the hotel. And we had wonderful times. One time I asked the rabbi, I said, Rabbi, you have a lot of people here tonight. Is it like this all the time? Oh, no, people have come here from 95 miles away or whatever, you know. It was during the campaign. But it was good. It was special. And we appreciated that through our observance, some people were taught lessons. And some people just, it was so funny, the staff, they knew Friday night we weren't going out. And so they said, oh, good, it's Shabuti. We can take off or whatever. It was funny.
So I will tell very quickly a story about that. When immediately after Joe was announced as the vice presidential candidate, was the holiday that we just celebrated, Shavuot. In fact, Hadassah's and my offices were doing all of the planning for this, which we thank them for, because both of us were offline for 2 days. And on Shavuot, it was announced that Joe would be the vice presidential candidate. And then on Shavuot, he came to shul. And it just so happens, it might have been another occasion when we read the 10 Commandments. And when we read the 10 Commandments, it was Shavuos. Do you remember this? When we read the 10 Commandments, everyone stands up in the synagogue as a sign of respect for the 10 Commandments. Shavuot is the holiday of the giving of the Torah. It just so happened that Joe and the security detail and the Secret Service and everybody came in right when the 10 Commandments were about to be read, and everybody stood up as he and Hadassah entered. And the AP reporter wrote, I saw after the holiday there was a story. The entire synagogue rose when the candidate came in, but it was really for the 10 Commandments.
Yes, that was so funny.
So we got such a good, many. And the whole synagogue was invested, and the whole Jewish community around the world so invested in that race. Now, the questions are pouring in, so I'm going to switch to the questions and the comments. Listening. The first one is that the book sounds like an amazing read for all immigrants and family of American immigrants. That is basically everyone except for the Native Americans, the American Indian community. So it really is that kind of a book. And please do click on the link in the chat and order your copy. But the particular question that this anonymous attendee asks is there one person in particular that you hope reads this book?
Well, I would be very touched if immigrants were interested in reading the book to just understand that we all have the same reactions. We're all troubled. Becoming Americanized is not so easy. Learning a new language is not so easy. And all the ways of the American are different when you're from a different place.
So different.
Language, everything. And not only the language, but the food is so different. I remember my mother used to say, Amerikanische. It was, she'd say it was an American thing. She didn't like it, but you learn. You're the kid of immigrants. You learn you don't necessarily want some of that food. I remember my mom used to always have boiled chicken, and I got to dislike it. We're all subject to change, and when you're a kid, you're always ready to rebel a little bit.
I know that the people when my friends would come to my house, and they would see the things that we ate, the herring, the Hebrew national salami, the smell of that herring, the kippers. They couldn't believe some of the things, the bread, the dark bread that my friends had never seen anything like it. It was an age of It was an age of wonder bread. So it's an adjustment,
Yeah.
and you never, as an immigrant, the child of immigrants in my case, first generation American, you never quite adjust to every stage of your life, you're still adjusting to how different the society is from what you experience at home.
Oh,
so another
totally.
question from one of our attendees. There are two very good questions in here. I'm going to sandwich one of mine in between. Another one has just popped up. Our audience may not allow me to ask more of my questions, which is fine. This is their event. The first one is a follow-up question on the blended family. This attendee is so interested in how you co-parented a blended family while your husband was a senator. Were there ever moments when you were overwhelmed by the situation?
Well, there were moments that the level of busyness and craziness, the schedule, and then you're like every normal couple. Oh my God, when are we picking the baby up? Well, it wasn't a baby, but the 10-year-old, the 12. What are we going to do? We have to go to this conference. We have to both go. Just, I don't know what's going on. And so it's an amazing thing all the time.
Hadassah, we lost your
No, I'm
image.
going to put it. I'm putting it in. I'll put it on. Yes, I know. I'm telling you, I have been.
In that case, if you're making an adjustment, you can keep answering the question. I just wanted you to know.
Yes. And so what I am trying to do now is plug in this. Yes. So we are all working through being different, and simultaneously at the same time, we are constantly hearing from our parents. They can't believe, of course, we're different. Okay.
I've got you back.
I've got
the visual back.
Yeah, we're here. And it's just, look, being an immigrant and adjusting. Plus, I was saying to this man from Pakistan that one of the points we also have to remember as we're immigrants' children and we learn the language, we have friends over and we're talking to them in a language that's foreign to our parents. So in a way, we have a separateness that develops. And, we have to take care because our parents, just like we today, sometimes the kids have better computer skills than the adults, as we know, right? So it's a challenge.
And speaking of friends, that brings me to the next question from one of our attendees. Yes. And that is that you talk in your book about being different from the other families in Washington at the time. Did you have a community or friends to lean on who could relate and help you through? And how do your communities of friends look different now? I know part of the answer to that question because we have our very unique and wonderful Kesher community, but you were a part of other communities in your neighborhood, in Hillendale, and in other communities, the Senate communities. So talk about those communities and how they got you through.
Yes, and we're here. They all were very important parts of my life. And we had people in our neighborhood, some very close friends who cared. And some of them observed Shabbat with us, which gave us an occasion to see people on a Friday night and Saturday. And otherwise, during the week, it was hard to make commitments anywhere, as you know, with the Senate. It's always busy. And having a dinner party in the middle of the week, you have no idea if it's going to happen or not. I used to tell other wives, I said, you know what you got to do? probably we just have to have a dinner party with ourselves, the spouses. And if the men come, fine. If not, but that's a weird thing. People don't do that so much. Although these days they're probably doing it more. Now people don't get, we were bipartisan. We were caring. We articulated with people who didn't believe the same things as we believed, whether that was in religion, philosophy, groceries. That's how we were used to acting with all the people. So it's an important characteristic, I think, to constantly be mindful of others who are not at all like you, or maybe they raise their kids similar to you and nothing else.
It's as if you read the next question in the Q&A. Oh. It is so lovely, even though this question I've been tracking, it predated what you just said. It is so lovely to hear you speak with such desire to unite and find common ground among people. Our attendees asks, were you always like this, or did your life circumstances create this spirit in you? I think if you read the book, everybody, you'll see the mix of ingredients and you'll hear the voices of the people who created our friend Hadassah. But Hadassah, were you always like this, or were there life circumstances that created this spirit in you?
Well, I think, I was always taught by my parents to be nice to everybody. I remember when I was at Stern College for 2 years, part of Yeshiva University. And I remember my mother came and visited and met the doorman. And he said to her, "Oh, your daughter's so nice and polite and friendly." Well, that was the one thing she took out of that weekend that she was at, the college. I was taught to be that way, and probably coming out of the stories of how this horrible stuff happened out of the Shoah, out of all of these horrible. I was reading the New York Times today. They're finding people, children, 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, were taken away from their parents. And they were found years later. They were looking at the pictures and they realized who these individuals are. And the man said, "That was me. That was my sister. There they are in the train." So you know what, Norm, we came through such ugliness, such difficulty, that of course what we want to do is have strong communities. And communities are not people who you sit and read the same book with, not who you go out and have a meal with. Communities go beyond that. And it really literally is, we have to take care of each other. And we have to look, I'll tell you that story about the mailman recently who comes to our apartment building. And he said he had bought the tape. I had an audio tape that I did. And he loved it. And it was so sweet.
Hadassah, I have two different places and I'm sorry, did I cut in or can
No.
Okay, good. I have two different places in the book I'm toggling between for these next two questions. Okay. So you write in the book that we have entered a dark period in our history. Given the alarming presence of hate speech today, it may seem hard to believe that over the course of the entire 2000 campaign, we never encountered any anti-Semitic behavior or remarks. That leads me to the next question on these. These have been wonderful questions, friends. The next question on our list, which is, have you ever experienced racism at other times in your life?
No, I have not. I never have. And I experienced respect when we were in Gardner, Massachusetts, and my dad, who had his law degree, but he wasn't going to go if his law school gone over again. And he was also ordained as a rabbi. And I'll never forget when I went to park my dad's car, and it was right before his giving this benediction before my graduation from high school. And I bumped into a tree, and I said, oh no, I rushed to the garage that my dad used. And I said to the man, my dad's giving the benediction tonight at the graduation. If I come in with a ruined car. So he quickly took a hammer. They punched it out. So there were no, and I said, oh, thank you so much. And that's what we learned in a small town. You know, we have to keep our eye on the ball. And I always repeat, Tikkun Olam. It's our responsibility to repair the world. And the only way that we can do that is in small steps and getting our children, our communities. The words that I hear leaders speak are inappropriate. We have to be polite. That's how we teach our children, our community, our world. We can't act loud, say whatever you want to say. It's not that way. I'll never forget the first time in the beginning of Joe being a senator. And I was sitting down, I don't even remember, with, I guess it was with family. And I said something, and Joe looked at me and he said, sweetheart, you say that louder, that's going to be on the front page of the Hartford Courant tomorrow. I thought, yeah, what did I get myself into?
I want to ask you about this is one of my questions. I want to ask you about another moment, and it goes to your point about community. And you write it's in chapter 9 of the book, which is entitled Gratitude, and it's about your 9/11 experience.
Oh.
And the car service.
Right.
Will you just share? It was a very human moment. Will you just share it with us and tell us why it resonated with you so strongly that you put it in your memoir?
Well, there I was giving a speech in Dallas, Texas on a Sunday night. I think it was Sunday night. I can't remember, because the next morning, this gentleman from Texas invited us, after I'd given the speech, to a fundraiser he was doing for some people in the Democratic Party at that point. And I went with the woman who had driven with me to go. We had flown to Dallas, and we went there in the morning, and all of a sudden the TV's on, and the tower is hit by an airplane. And then a few minutes later, the other one is hit. I was so shocked. And there I was. And then we were outside. So that's where the gathering was. And as I stood outside, I got a phone call from Joe. And Joe said, keep calm. Everything will be good. I'm at the Capitol. I can't come out. I said, well, where's Hani? Our daughter. She went with our neighbor. She's taking her home. Everything's okay. I said, okay, Joey. He hung up. And I will never forget. So Heather, my assistant for that trip, said, we can't get any flights out. There are no planes. There's nothing. Let's try to find a driver. I said, you're kidding? From Dallas? Yes. So we went to a hotel lobby, and she started asking, and this man said, well, there are some people who might be drivers. And he called them in and said, okay, they will drive. So then I was amazed, because it was these two guys with tattoos and leather jackets. And I didn't know them. And all I know is they said, well, we'll drive you to Washington. And so Heather and I said, okay. And they said, you'll have to sleep on the seat in the back of the car. And that's what we did. We traded her on the floor. You know, it was, oh God, it was crazy. Then before we started, Joe called and asked to speak to them. And he, I guess, hello. Oh, yes, they were in the Army. And Joe said, well, I just want to thank you. This is very precious property of ours. So please drive safely. And that was it. And they drove us. And then we finally stopped at a diner and we were getting something to eat. We were starved. And the gentleman sat down a few tables away. And then we sat down. And I said to Heather, Heather, these guys drove us today. And, you know, we have to invite them to our table. So I think they were surprised when I said, please join us. They just looked at me and then they sat down and we started talking to each other. And it was a beautiful, beautiful conversation. And I told them, when we come to Washington, D.C., gentlemen, I am going to give you a tour of the Capitol. How naive was I? There was nothing open. Everything was closed. Everything was blocked off. So I had to say goodbye to them. They left. And, you know, I've never talked to them since. But you know what? We're Americans. We're together. Whatever, we are together. And that's what we have to show to each other. We must learn each other's behavior and teach better behavior if we know how to our children. Wait, why is that?
Unmute. Beth is back, which is a sign that our wonderful hour is drawing to a close. Click in the link. You can get the book. The conversation will continue. I promise you, you'll enjoy it. I wanted to end by just reading the words that Hadassah included at the end of the passage where she tells the story, that little mini community that came together at the table in the diner. She writes, and so in the most uncertain of times, I ate with strangers. They told me about their families, their lives, and their service in the military. By the time we got to Washington, I knew so much about them. In their words, I heard my own story over our 25 hours on the road together. We made a connection that represents to me what this country is all about. I mark that because you will learn Hadassah's story. All of you will become travelers on the road together. Her marvelous life. It is a tale of connection, of what this country is all about. And you will learn so much about how Hadassah, we've only touched the surface, not just the joys, but of the challenges, the many, many challenges that she's confronted and overcome. And I think as Lindsay and I are so privileged to have Hadassah and Joe as friends, you will be able to benefit from the wisdom of Hadassah as we have for these many decades through this marvelous book. I want to thank her for writing the book, for submitting to this friendly cross-examination from me and our audience for an hour. And I want to thank Beth and Politics and Prose for hosting us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined us. It was a wonderful conversation and great questions. I wish we had more time to take even more of them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Norm. Mwah. Thanks. You're so sweet.
And once more, thank you so much to our author, Hadassah Lieberman, our moderator, Norman Eisen, and to everybody who has joined us this evening. Again, the link to purchase Hadassah, An American Story is in the chat, and it's also online at politics-prose.com. While you're there, you can check out our calendar of events. We've got events up through June right now, and you can see what's coming down the pipeline, what you might be interested in. We so appreciate everybody's time this evening, and we hope that you stay well and stay well read. Good night,
Thank you, Beth.
Good night.